Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Calynn Lawrence, and I'm the founder of the Holistic Healing Source for Marginalized Society. Thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation. Just a little bit of background about me. I have a doctorate in pastoral counseling, and I'm a multi-board certified trauma specialist and neurocriminology, as well as neuropsychotherapy professional. So I am excited to get into today's training. Thank you for joining us again. Without further delay, I'll go ahead and get into it. So let me share my screen. Alrighty, so today we're going to discuss the need for inclusive LGBTQ history in public schools. Here's a little bit of an introduction. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, so you'll hear me referencing Illinois. Go Pritzker. But this can apply to any state in any area of the U.S. Really, I feel like this should be an international thing. So just a little bit of preface there. The passing of the 2019 law in Illinois requiring the inclusion of LGBTQ history in public school curriculum is a monumental step forward. It is an acknowledgement that the struggles of the LGBTQIA individuals are no less significant than those faced by other marginalized communities, such as women and racial minorities. As such, it is critical that Illinois schools and all schools incorporate this history into their lesson plans. First, let's talk about acceptance and inclusion for all students, especially marginalized groups. DEI is about more than just race. So, diversity, equity, inclusion, and especially belonging, DEIB, truthfully, is about more than just race. By teaching about the contributions made by members of the LGBTQ community throughout history, we can create an environment where every student feels safe, recognized, and respected. Representation matters. As someone who has worked in education for a while, I am very passionate about this. I have been the assistant director of a youth performing arts school. I have been the national communications designee for a network of charter schools across various states targeting low income populations. I have been working in professional education, doing mostly within the medical field, marketing and communicating and advocating for um, very robust professional continuing education for healthcare administration professionals and so on and so forth. So I am very passionate about education as a whole, and representation for everyone really does make a difference. In order to create an atmosphere of acceptance, which should be the goal in any school, especially if we're talking about pre-K through 12, where children are going through those really tough formative years that will shape who they become as adults, creating that atmosphere of acceptance and support for all students, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation. Yes, it's necessary to include both, is essential to make sure that the LGBTQIA history being included in public school curriculums is effective. So, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation, meaning the difference, in case you're unaware, gender identity is whether you identify as male, female, non binary, so on and so forth. And then sexual orientation is who you are romantically and or sexually attracted to. So a man who dates men, a man who dates women, a man who dates everyone, being pansexual, so on and so forth. Sexual orientation would be considered more along the lines of who you date, and gender identity is you as an individual. What gender identity or what gender do you feel like most represents you? So that's a little bit of a breakdown for those who may not know the difference. When marginalized groups are represented in educational materials, it sends an important message that those groups are valued and accepted, which, going back to that culture of acceptance and support, we really do want that. Let's talk about fighting fear and phobia with early education and acknowledgement. exposure and experience encourages acceptance. Public schools must strive to create supportive environments for all students, regardless of gender or sexual orientation. They serve the public, thus, they need to represent the public in their curriculum and their culture and their policies. Research has demonstrated that when members of minority groups are excluded or treated differently, their mental health suffers significantly. And the use of the word minority is not just in reference to race, it is in reference to any marginalized group. So, women, LGBTQIA, disabled, racial minorities, BIPOC populations, all of that, when they are excluded or treated differently, their mental health suffers significantly. And as a matter of fact, students who experience bullying related to their sexual orientation or gender identity are at a much greater risk for suicide attempts than students who do not experience this kind of bullying. So, if you actually get into the nitty gritty statistics of how LGBTQIA youth, especially trans youth, and especially when they have intersectionally marginalized identities when it comes to race, when it comes to abilities, when it comes to, a varying degree of other marginalized characteristics, they are at notably higher risks for suicide attempts than those who are not. And that is alarming. We can't say we care about the youth and we care about kids and ignore that fact. That is just not compatible with the other. So, keeping that in mind, it's very important that we prioritize making sure that all youth feel safe and included and represented in our public schools. It is critical to ensure that there are inclusive anti bullying policies in place so that we can protect our youth from these risks. This has been particularly true for members of the LGBTQ community who have faced generations of prejudice and discrimination. Swanson and Gettinger's research on teachers' knowledge, attitudes, and supportive behaviors towards the LGBTQ students found that having gay straight alliances at schools was associated with higher levels of support from teachers. This also suggests that providing social outlets like these helps foster more tolerant learning environments where all students feel safe enough to learn without the fear of judgment or harassment. We cannot leave this matter up to personal parental choice. Don't even start. It's history, it's human rights, not religious or personal preferences. Many parents opt to either not teach their children about the LGBTQ community at home or they outwardly condemn it. In a public setting, this should not be argued. This should not be debated. If you don't want your kid to learn about certain populations of people, which I would argue is inherently wrong, but if you are one of those people, let's say, maybe you're hyper religious, you're very devout, and your religion expressly condemns any form of support for the LGBTQIA, then put your kid in a school that, you know, is a private religious school, pay the tuition, and have them go there. To sit here and try and strong arm public spaces from serving the entire public is it's ridiculous to say the least. This leaves an education gap that needs to be filled by the schools when parents opt to not teach their children about the LGBTQIA or they condemn it. Additionally, research suggests that providing information to students about gender identity can help foster acceptance among their peers. When students learn more about what it means to be queer, both historically and currently, it allows them to develop an appreciation for diversity that will hopefully stay with them throughout their lives. Educating young people about LGBTQ issues and history gives them the opportunity to develop compassion for others who may not share their same experiences or perspectives. So it's not about some kind of gay agenda. It's not about a trans agenda. Okay. I know that's a big thing, especially among the Abrahamic religions, right? People of the Abrahamic religions. And I'm saying this as a Christian myself. I know that there's a lot of talk about some kind of secret agenda for, the schools want your kids to become trans or gay. It's not about converting them to anything. It's about fostering a culture of acceptance and support. And if they know about the historical and current issues that face people of those demographics, they are much less likely to bully them. They are much less likely to harass them. They are much less likely to contribute to those children's suffering mental health, which could ultimately lead to already increased risks of suicide, but actual attempts. And unfortunately, many succeed every year. So if you look at it as a life and death issue, because it is, you can understand why it's so important that children learn to be tolerant of people of all backgrounds, not just ones who share their same religion, who share their same worldviews, who share their same political views. Learn how to get along with all of the youth in your peer group without bullying, without harassment, without shame. It's very important. Knowledge and community enables progress and advancement. Strength in numbers, allies, and supporters. Including queer history in school curriculums is essential for helping students understand both contemporary issues related to LGBTQ rights as well as the struggles that have been faced throughout history. By learning about figures like Harvey Milk or Sylvia Rivera, who fought tirelessly for LGBTQ rights, students gain a better understanding of how far we have come in terms of acceptance, but also how much work still needs to be done. They learn about the importance of advocating for equality and standing up against discrimination, which is especially important in today's political climate. In studies, they point out in the work specifically of, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this, so Cespeniak is the best I can do. Um, they point out in their work on liberalism and feminism in education that teaching children about sexual orientation issues is important because it allows them to make well-informed decisions before becoming adults. It can also help students understand that there is more than one way to live a fulfilled life, and it opens up opportunities for meaningful conversations about gender identity and sexuality among peers. Furthermore, learning about how far society has come in terms of respecting people's differences will empower young people to stand up against oppression and fight for social justice in all forms, not just for queer people, not just for trans people, but discrimination and oppression of all marginalized communities. Similar to women and countless ethnic minorities throughout US history, they have been systemically marginalized. This means that in many cases, their voices have not been heard or their struggles acknowledged. To achieve true equality, it is important for America to recognize the unique challenges that the LGBTQ community faces and actively work towards solutions. According to Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, oppressive systems rely on a false generosity, which serves to maintain the oppressed in a state of dependence and submission. Simply tolerating LGBTQIA people does not go far enough if we want true equality and social justice. Rather, we must be intentional about ensuring their rights are respected and protected. For example, Mark L. Hatzenberler and Catherine M. Keyes conducted a study on suicide attempts among lesbian and gay youths in states with inclusive anti-bullying policies versus those without it. They found that in states with such policies, the anti-bullying policies against LGBTQIA youth, the risk of suicide attempts were reduced by 14% compared with states who don't have those policies. This indicates that policy change can make a notable difference in the well being of LGBTQ youth, but only if they are actively included in those conversations. Moreover, as Alyssa Kimmel argues in her article, an imperfect but vital tool to stop bullying of LGBTQ students, students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender are often subject to bullying due to their sexual orientation or gender identity expression. Anti-bullying initiatives must take into account specific issues faced by these vulnerable populations. Otherwise, they risk further marginalization with them instead of protecting them from discrimination and harassment. The last talking point is that a better tomorrow begins today. It is clear that America owes much more than mere tolerance to its LGBTQIA citizens. Rather, it must actively seek ways to ensure that they are represented within the education system so they can enjoy the same rights and acknowledgement and representation as other citizens do. Not only does it provide a more comprehensive education, but it also works to reduce stigma around gender identity and sexual orientation. By recognizing the unique challenges faced by this population, such as discrimination or bullying, we can begin to create an environment where all individuals feel safe and accepted, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender expression. By passing this law, Illinois specifically has taken a huge step towards creating has taken a huge step forward in creating a more inclusive society. Despite this effort, the job is far from finished. We owe it to our youth and future generations to continue striving towards fairness and equality for all. And as usual, here are the references if you want to do some further reading. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's lesson, and I hope you enjoyed it.